Would you prefer to learn how to beat the best players in your game or how to extract the most value from the weakest players in your player pool? If you care about winning money, then you should choose option 2, beating the weakest players. Why? Because especially at live low-stakes games, you don't make your money against good players, but by getting the most money from unstudied players. After years of playing live low-stakes poker, I have identified a hack that can make a huge difference to your win rate, just like it did for me. I call this hack the Stephen King method. And in this video, I will show you exactly what it is and how you can apply it at the live poker table. To understand this concept, let me tell you a quick story. When I was little, I really liked playing with dinosaurs. I had a T-Rex, the most famous carnivorous dinosaur. I had a Triceratops with its 3 horns and large frill at the back of its head, who would often battle my T-Rex. And I had a Stegosaurus with its distinctive row of large bony plates along its back and the spikes on its tail, called the Thagomizer. What does that have to do with poker? Hear me out. I'm sorry to tell you, but this was a bluff. I was one of the boys who couldn't care less about dinosaurs. I actually preferred playing with cowboys, and I would even have preferred a Barbie doll over dinosaurs. But you believed my story when I told it, right? I told it with conviction, and I even included some details that made the story more believable. And this is the connection with poker. When you play against recreational players, it is all about storytelling. Here is how recreational players think about poker. I'll tell you a hand I played recently. I raised pre-flop with Queen-Jack suited in the hijack position. Both blinds called. The flop was 10-6-4 rainbow. This is not a great board to make a continuation bet as a bluff against 2 recreational players, so I just checked behind. The turn was a king. They checked to me again, and this was the green light for me to bet. Even if I get called here, I have an open-ended straight draw, and a queen or a jack might also bail me out if he has a 10 or an underpair. The small blind folds quickly, the big blind tags for a while, but then he says,
"I'm sure you have ace-king."
And so he folded his hand face up. He had 10-9. What does this comment tell us? Well, 2 things. One is that recreationals often put raisers on ace-king. That is funny and silly at the same time, as if we can't have any other hand, right? But more importantly, my opponent folded the better hand for a specific reason. He didn't think about my range the way a good player would do. Instead, he just believed my story. It made sense to him that I didn't c-bet my ace-king on the flop, but then decided to bet it big on the turn once the king came. He was basically afraid to continue because he totally believed my story, and he was terrified to continue and then potentially face another big bet on the river. For recreational players, it's all about storytelling. So if you can tell a story half as well as Stephen King, your opponents will be as terrified as if they were reading The Shining. I don't know if Stephen King ever played poker, although the Hand and Mob database does have a profile for a Stephen King on it, although I doubt that it is the famous author. Nonetheless, I have decided to call this hack the Stephen King method. There was a simple example with a small profit, but here's how you can supersize this exploit by improving your storytelling skills. And don't worry if you skipped your creative writing class in high school after your pet hamster wrote you a letter asking for emotional support. I'm here to help. Take this hand, for example. A recreational player raises in middle position. We call in the big blind with pocket sixes. The flop comes Jack 7-7. He makes a half-pot continuation bet. Recreational players love their half-pot bets. It's almost as if there were no other sizes. Anyway, we call. The turn is a deuce of clubs, bringing in a flush draw. He bets half-pot again, and we now have a decision to make. I feel like I don't really want to bluff catch in this spot, so we could either fold or try to be a bit creative and check raise. But let's go back to our story. Is our story believable if we check raise here? Well, semi-believable, I would say. We are saying that we have a 7 or a flush draw, so if he has an overpair or a jack, I don't see him folding. And this is where the story supersizing element comes in. We have to sell the story twice to convince him. So the check raise on the turn is just the first act. If he calls, we now need to be a bit more convincing with our storytelling. If the river is a brick, we can now go for the overbet jam on the river. Unless he has a set or trips, he will have an incredibly hard time to call in this spot because your story makes total sense. With a 7, you didn't have to check raise the flop because it was so dry. But then, on the turn, you raised it because there was a flush draw. And now you're jamming on a safe river. If the flush comes in, it's almost even better. He will think that you could have the flush or trips. Obviously, you would not jam trips if the flush completes, but he doesn't know that. So in the end, he folds his pocket kings face up. Of course, some opponents can't let go of their overpair, and you will look like an absolute idiot. But poker is not about avoiding looking like an idiot, it is about maximizing your winnings. Good storytelling achieves just that. And you thought poker was about math, huh? Anyway, there is a third way you can exploit recreational players with storytelling. But this time you tell a story the way some untalented Stephen King copycat would do. Here's an example. A passive recreational player raises in position. You have Jack 10 of hearts in the big blind and you call. The flop comes A7-4 with 2 hearts. When he bets, we have an easy call because I don't want to raise here against a passive recreational player. The turn is an offsuit 8, now giving us a gut shot as well. He bets again. There is nothing else for us to do than to call again. He most likely has a good ace or better. The river brings in the flush. We are now most likely good. Take a moment and think what you would do in this spot. You could check, but now it is very likely that he won't go for thin value with his pair or set, so that doesn't seem like a good option. This leaves a donk bet. And by the way, donk bets don't mean that they are bad bets or that we are donks if we bet. It is just the name for a bet made out of position if we were not the aggressor in the street before. If we donk bet really big, what is the story that we are telling? Well, exactly the story that we don't want to tell, which is that we have a flush. So here's the clever story as told by a straight C student. We bet around half pot or even a bit smaller. This size suggests that we are afraid that he might bet big, and so it looks like we have a hand, but not a great hand. There is a chance that he will still fold, of course, but I think it is pretty likely that he will call. He won't love calling in this spot, but for such a price, most recreational players just can't fold if they have a hand like top pair or a set. But be careful, if you have to call more than a half-pot bet on the turn, then you will make a mistake if you call the turn and then only get less than a half-pot bet on the river, because the implied odds don't make up for your investment. Storytelling is one way to exploit recreational poker players, but noticing their tells can be even more profitable. In this video here, I go over 5 such tells.